Okay. All right, it's 7 o'clock on the nose. So I want to welcome you all to our Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association Virtual Viewpoints presentation titled Forecasters of Watershed Health, Birds of the Canandaigua Lake Watershed. I'm Lindsay McMillan. I'm the Association Director here with CLWA. And we're just going to start out this evening with a couple of housekeeping items. First, you notice that when everybody entered the meeting, you've been muted upon entry. So for tonight's talk, we're going to hold all questions until the end of John Van Niel's presentation. And we're going to use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen to chat our questions in. So both myself and one of our board members, Katrina, are going to be monitoring that chat. And then we're also recording tonight's talk, and we're going to make it available to those that registered this evening in a follow-up email. Okay, so a little bit about CLWA for those that aren't familiar with us. So CLWA is a member-supported nonprofit organization, and we're focused on protecting the health of our watershed. So here you'll see our mission, which in essence is to educate and inspire those that live here and those that love the lake to become stewards of our watershed. We do this through education, outreach, and advocacy. We host webinars and events focused on watershed health. Then we also hope to inspire future generations of environmental protectors through K-12 education in the Canandaigua, Naples, and Marcus Whitman school districts. We also support a range of water quality programs powered by citizen scientists, like our harmful algae bloom monitoring program and our SekiDisc water clarity program. And those activities are really helping us better understand changes to our lake ecosystem. And they help us communicate with you, our members and supporters, with regular updates and notifications on water quality. So we thank you for logging on tonight to learn more about the birds of the watershed. I know we're all really excited. And we encourage you to follow us for more upcoming events and talks throughout 2021. Follow us on Facebook. We also have an Instagram page and a YouTube channel where some of our previous talks are posted. And then you can also visit our website to sign up for e-news, and we'll send email blasts straight to your inbox. And we're always in need of more members and volunteers to achieve our mission. So consider getting more involved with CLWA. So at this time, I'd like to send it over to Sonia Carnevale, who is a CLWA board member, and she's one of our outreach committee members who put this great program on tonight. And she'll introduce Dr. Van Niel. So over to you, Sonia.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our first virtual Viewpoints. We are so excited to be hosting Dr. John Van Niel tonight for his presentation on birds of Canandaigua Lake and how they may forecast our watershed health. Dr. John Van Niel is a professor of environmental conservation and horticulture at FLCC, where he's worked for the past 26 years. He's also the director for the Muller Field Station, and from what I understand, quite an enthusiastic birder. So we are looking forward to his presentation, and without any further ado, really, I'm gonna just turn this right over and welcome Dr. Van Niel.
Thank you very much, Sonia. How's everybody doing? You can't answer because you're muted, right? So Katrina's gonna unshare her screen, and then I can share my screen. Perfect. As you guys heard, we're going to save the questions till the very end, just to make this a little bit easier to manipulate. I thought I had this all perfect, but of course I don't. So is that good now? Can you see my screen the way you're supposed to? Good, I got a couple of yeses, so we'll go with that. Last thing I need to do is minimize you guys. I will start out by saying I'm very excited to give this presentation tonight, but I will say that the topic was chosen by someone besides me. So I was asked if I would talk about this topic which I agreed to, and then immediately started investigating it. So I think everybody probably has a little bit of a sense of what the answer is going to be about this, but I really did try to dig into this a little bit more and boost my knowledge so I can give you guys some better information than just a couple shrugs and a couple maybes here. I do want to point out that all of the photos in this PowerPoint are mine unless indicated. And I wrote this slide, this is my second slide. And by the time I got done, the only photo in this entire PowerPoint that is not mine is the picture of me to the right there. My daughter took that picture. This was a trip that we were able to take to Sri Lanka. That's what I look like when I hike. That's my pre-pandemic looking body. I've got a couple extra pounds at this point, and that same blank look is still present on me. But I love taking pictures of wildlife and birds specifically. So I've got some from around the world here. That's a jabiru that just flew from its nest in the Pantanal of Brazil. That's a hornbill as the sun is rising in Kruger National Park in South Africa. And then a flock of redheads flying by the city pier in Canandaigua there. So I do like taking pictures of wildlife near and far, and I was able to use quite a bit of the pictures that I really needed for this PowerPoint were easy enough for me to find here. So I framed the question as, can large birds predict the health of the lake they, quote, live on? Because that's what you want to know, right? I mean, I see the list there. Not everybody on the list lives within the Canandaigua Lake watershed, but that's the focus of this group. So let your local lake, what can your local birds tell you about it? And essentially what you're asking is, are birds bioindicators? So this is the first definition that came up when I Google searched bioindicator: an organisms whose status in an ecosystem is analyzed as an indication of the ecosystem's health. And I love the analogy of that as the canary in the coal mine. So if you are unfamiliar with that phrase, you are probably too young to be up this late. Canary in the coal mine was a real thing. They would bring birds into the mines, and because the birds were so much smaller and so much more sensitive to the buildup of carbon dioxide, that the birds would be an early warning system that the air was a problem and they needed to get out. So that's what you're essentially asking. And bioindicators have two main characteristics, I would say. First, they should be easy to find. Now, I read a couple sources that said bioindicators should be common, and I changed that to easy to find because it doesn't necessarily have to be an animal that's common in the environment if it was maybe unusual or rare, but still easy to find. And then, of course, it has to be sensitive to change. You've got to pick a species that's going to actually tell you if the ecosystem is degrading. And then some examples of bioindicators. Lichens are used for air quality. Trout and stoneflies would be two good examples for water quality, especially dissolved oxygen. And then, not to steal my own thunder here, but bald eagles are used as a bioindicator for pollutants, especially organochlorides. I wanted to give an example of an animal that would not be a good bioindicator. So this is probably the prettiest picture of carp that I've ever taken. This is at the spillway at Montezuma. If anybody's familiar with that, you've ever taken the wildlife drive, the carpal tunnel, if you will, where the carp try to get up into the main pool. And the sun was coming up in the east, and I was facing into it and got these nice golden fins here. Carp are not great indicators of the ecosystem's health because they're very tolerant of many pollutants. That's what makes carp so successful. They also are a fish that can handle low dissolved oxygen. So we wouldn't look at them as a way to tell whether the ecosystem was healthy or not. On the other hand, their presence doesn't necessarily mean that the ecosystem is unhealthy. So carp are going to live in healthy waters as well, but they're not going to be a good indicator of poor water quality. Then I started going through some of the other large birds, and I came upon waterfowl as my first one here. So to an ornithologist, Waterfowl is basically swans, geese, and ducks here in North America. I understand that there's other birds that are associated with water, but hear me out here. This family, this order, excuse me, of birds has about 150 species throughout the entire world. Now think about the fact that New York State alone has been host to 46 of those species. Literally 1/3 of the waterfowl on the planet have been recorded in New York State. Some incredibly rarely, like just a few. Some only along the coast. But here in New York State, one could encounter 3 species of swan, 8 species of geese, and 35 different duck species. Let's start with the swans since they're the biggest. Oh, I probably should address this part. So look at the difference between waterfowl as 1 word and waterfowl as 2 words. So this little attitude guide here is a pied-billed grebe. By many people's definition, this would be considered waterfowl because it's certainly a bird that's associated with the water, but by most ornithologists' definition, this wouldn't be a waterfowl because it's not a duck, a goose, or a swan. It's not in that order. So I've just decided not to really talk about the coots, the merganzers, the grebes, the mud hens, if you will, but we really will stick to the waterfowl. Okay, this is the slide I thought I was popping up to, sorry. So we've got 3 species of swan, as I mentioned. The 2 native species of swans look very much alike. And in both of these views, it would be pretty hard to tell which ones I was looking at, either tundra swans or trumpeter swans. And I know those swans look kind of funny on the right-hand side there, but little modesty that these guys have. I wanted to give you an idea of how they feed. So swans are what we would call dabblers. So they're sticking their bodies, their long necks underwater and trying to gather plant material in that way. Most of what swans eat is plant. The 3rd species of swan that we have in New York State is the mute swan. Maybe the best known one because they're so distinctive with that orange bill and that big black knob. These are the ones from fairy tales. These are native to Eurasia, not native to New York State here, but we have them. I took this picture up by Sodus Bay this past winter. And I want to talk about mute swans specifically because the problem with mute swans, can I diverge a little bit before I talk about bioindicators? Mute swans are an invasive species because they're incredibly aggressive. So maybe you know that geese have a reputation of being aggressive, and maybe somebody out there has been chased by a goose. Imagine now that this is a goose on steroids, which is basically the description of a swan, much, much larger than a goose. And mute swans are successful because they're aggressive. So if you had mute swans nesting, let's say on your pond or a little private lake, you would not have any other waterfowl nesting there because the mute swans wouldn't tolerate it. They would drive out other swans, other geese, other ducks, and people as well. They're fairly aggressive, and it's almost Thanksgiving. So I want you to picture a whole Thanksgiving turkey. Okay, you're probably not going to have a whole turkey this year. Are you going to actually be able to have Thanksgiving with a bunch of people? Maybe you're still going to have a whole Thanksgiving turkey, but you're going to eat it by yourself. Think about those wings. So if you've ever bought chicken wings, you get the wing part with the 1 bone in it, and then you get the wing part with the 2 bones in it. And then maybe you still get the hand as well. On a whole turkey, the wing would end in that little bit that's very bony and there's not a lot of meat on it, and it looks pretty pointed. That's the 4 fingers of the bird all fused together in what's called the manus, but the thumb stays free, stays separate. And it's really been reduced to just a spike of bone, essentially. There's a few feathers on it that can be very important in some birds in flight, like think of little flaps on a wing of an airplane. But essentially, no one really would have any reason to know that a bird even has it unless you were attacked by a mute swan. When you look at this guy right here, I'm not saying he's not going to attack you with that beak. He certainly might try to bite you, but there's no teeth in that beak. There's no sharp bits. There's nothing there to injure you. How people get injured by mute swans and how other waterfowl get injured by mute swans is by those sharp thumbs. They literally will beat you with their wings and stab you with their thumbs. I thought thumbs were just for hitchhiking and rating movies, but apparently they can also be a deadly weapon. I really shouldn't joke about it too much. Like people have been really seriously injured by mute swan thumbs, which is an embarrassing thing, I guess to admit. I bring that all up because I want to ask you if waterfowl, and specifically in this case, swans, make good bioindicators. So remember our characteristics. Are they easy to find? Yes. The next question then is, are they sensitive to pollution? And it turns out that in all of the birds that we can mention, from large to small, are sensitive to many kinds of pollution. But where swans become a good bioindicator is in avian diseases. So think about what I just said about the aggressive nature of the mute swan. Because this is a bird that's going to chase away all other things that look like it, it is likely to encounter other birds and literally come in contact with them when they're beating them with their sharp thumbs. So there's actually a research project going on in Michigan right now, where my daughter lives, where they're trying to come up with a way to use to test mute swans for avian diseases, not necessarily because swans are prone to the disease, but because swans come in close contact with a wide variety of other birds, and therefore would be able to catch these diseases, or at least show the pathogens, whether they're symptomatic or not. So yes, swans could be a good bioindicator, but not necessarily for the health of the lake. And the reason for that is, have a look at some of the other things that we need to consider. So are our swans, or waterfowl in general, resident or migrant? That's going to have a huge impact. And it's such a big concept that I'm actually going to mention it a couple times during this presentation. I have to tell you, this is a little unsettling because I'm only staring at my own screen and I have no idea if anyone else is still in the room at all or not. So maybe I'll unclick this at the end and it'll just be me talking to myself. And then you really need to consider, what does the animal eat? So I showed you, and I told you that swans are mostly vegetarians. So that's going to have an impact on what kind of toxins they would be able to pick up, what they might be able to indicate in the environment based on what they're putting into their body. And then finally, if what you really wanted to know, if this question came from a Canandaigua Lake resident, someone that was concerned about the health of the lake, and they wanted to know about if the swans were going to tell them something about the health of their specific lake, how much time are those birds spending at that lake, and how much time are they spending in other places? Are they finding their food just in Canandaigua Lake, or are they finding them in many different places? And if they're finding them in lots of different places, maybe that wouldn't tell you that much about what's going on within Canandaigua Lake. Everybody with me so far? Thumbs up if you're with me. I can't see it, but I just want you to think about those mute swan thumbs one more time. I want to talk about this picture before we go. This is a tundra swan, and I love taking pictures with challenging light, and sometimes they look kind of moody, and this wouldn't be a magazine cover kind of picture because it's dark and overexposed in the background, but I like the emotion that it evokes. And I love the fact that swan was on one leg, and look at how tilted that leg has to be in order for it to be, the foot is under the center of gravity of that bird, right? And so it has to be sort of in the middle of the bird, and that's why the leg is so cocked out and looking at such an angle. What bothers me about this picture is the two little sticks in the foreground that looks like someone has built something to prop this swan up so he doesn't fall over. So somebody that knows about Photoshop's got to help me out with that one. Okay. One step down from swans in size here is geese. I mentioned that there are 8 species of geese found in New York State. Pete Saraceno is probably rattling them off right now in his head. And we can really boil it down to 2. There's really 2 species of geese that just dominate, the Canada goose and the snow goose. And throughout this whole presentation, folks, I'm going to try my hardest to use proper terminology. So did you know that birds have official names? There's actually a naming committee in North America, and there's likewise in other places in the world. And it's not Canadian goose, it's Canada goose. It's I didn't name it. I am just reporting it there. There's two basic varieties of snow geese, although they're the same species. There's a greater snow goose and a lesser snow goose. And I believe I have a picture of a greater and a lesser. I'll let you figure out which one is which. I took that picture in Geneva. I think it was this winter as well. I was with my wife. She can probably tell you better than I can there. Okay, so let's have a look at these guys. First, let's talk about snow geese. Raise your hand if you've ever seen snow geese. Good, that's most of you guys. So one thing that you probably know about snow geese is they're migrants. If you see a snow goose in the summer in the Finger Lakes, that's probably not a goose that's, quote, lost. That's probably a goose that's injured. That's a goose that could not migrate, so it did not migrate. I would argue, although it's a little bit difficult to prove, that the snow goose isn't here because it wants to be here, that it chose the beautiful Finger Lakes instead of the beautiful Arctic to live. I really believe that they're injured birds. So because they migrate and they just pass through our area, that's an important consideration. And I also was taught when I was a student at Finger Lakes Community College that snow geese are what are known as grubbers. So a snow goose is going to pull up a plant on land by its roots and eat the whole thing. It's going to eat the top and it's going to eat the bottom. And if I was a farmer and I had a group of snow geese come into my winter wheat field, I would be much more upset than if I had a pile of Canada geese come into my winter wheat field, because Canada geese are a little more polite. They're going to take the tops, but they're not going to dig up the whole plant. The snow geese are gonna eat the whole plant, roots and all. And snow geese are super famous right now for having such a high population. I like this picture because there's a lot of snow geese in it. I took this picture in Savannah, New York, just north of Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge at the famous potato fields, which are all full of corn now. And here are two pictures that can really give you an idea of the entire size of the flock that we can have in the Finger Lakes. I counted these. There's 35,327 snow geese in this picture, and 2 Ross's geese, but I won't tell you where those are. This is when you get super lucky. There are times when the concentration is in the tens, if not 100,000 birds at a time. It looks amazing. It sounds amazing. It's just well worth trying to have at this. This is a sort of a March event. This is one of the last blizzards of the winter season. And if you really are interested in something like this, you can certainly reach out to me about a question and advice on how to find out if the geese are in. But Montezuma Refuge and the Audubon Center are usually very good on social media, posting about the status of these guys. Okay, so before I ask you if snow geese would be good bioindicators, let's have a look at Canada geese and kind of compare it. So the story with Canada geese is a little bit more complicated than snows. Some Canada geese are migrants. The vast majority are migrants, but we do have some resident Canada geese, some New Yorkers here. So the picture on the right is a Canada goose on a nest in the Finger Lakes. And the picture on the left is a gosling in the Finger Lakes. So he was born and bred right here in the Finger Lakes. So adults are called geese. The young ones are called gosling. Somebody let me know how old Ryan Gosling has to be before we just call him Ryan Goose. That would be helpful. And you can see what that little gosling is eating there. It's going after the plants. Now, obviously, he's young and still learning what to eat, but that's what the parents are directing him to. The new greens, and they're eating the leaves off of it. They're not digging down into the roots there. So, if I had to ask you, which of those 2 geese would be a better bioindicator for Canandaigua Lake, snow geese or Canada geese? Which would you say? I can't hear you, but I'm just going to assume that you're all saying Canada geese, because the Canada geese are going to spend more time here. And then specifically, which group of Canada geese are going to be the ones that would be a better bioindicator? Yes, the resident ones, right? So the snow geese spend so little time in the Finger Lakes, they would not give us a good snapshot of what's going on here in the Finger Lakes. Even the migratory Canada geese wouldn't give us a great indication of what's going on in the Finger Lakes. But if somehow you could identify the resident Canada geese, which should be pretty easy, just look for the ones in the summertime when the migrants have all gone. We're not checking passports here. We're not trying to check for accents. We're just looking to see who's here in the summertime. So yeah, Canada geese would be a good bioindicator because they would be a year-round resident. And then if you think again about what they're eating the plants, that would be maybe a downside for them being a good bioindicator, which we'll talk about in just a minute here. I don't think you're going to be able to see it, but I'm going to try anyway. In the eyeball of that goose, you can see the reflection of the sun. Well, just below that reflection of the sun is the reflection of my pickup truck. And maybe when you look at that, you can at least see the horizon. You can see the sky is the top half of the eyeball and the ground is the other half. So I'm at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge using my vehicle as a blind along the Wildlife Drive. I'm not some sneaky photographer that can hike for miles and get a great picture. I gotta wait for them to come to me, sort of thing. Ooh, we better talk about ducks before we leave the waterfowl here. So again, we've got resident ducks and we've got migrant ducks. And again, diet is an issue, except this time I can show you two different diets here. So both of these birds are plant eaters by and large. You've got a northern shoveler on the right, and you've got a green-winged teal on the left there. Both of them have some green in the head, and both of them are what we would call dabbling ducks, ducks that are going to feed from the surface and pick vegetation out of the water and consume it. Okay. In fact, I wanted to use the shoveler because of that giant Jimmy Durante beak that it has. None of my students have any idea who Jimmy Durante is. So I should probably come up with a better reason here. But that big vacuum cleaner that they have, that shoveler bill that gives them their name, really tells you that this is a plant eater. Let's compare that to this duck. This is a duck called the long-tailed duck. I grew up with the old name for this duck, which is the old squaw. In the year 2000, that official committee that I told you about changed the name of this duck from old squaw to long-tailed duck, which was a great suggestion. Old squaw is probably not a great name for this bird for several different reasons. So long-tailed duck is much more descriptive. I took this picture up in Arundequoit Bay, and you can see in the lower left-hand picture there, this duck is diving underwater. So you wouldn't necessarily dive underwater to get plants. I guess that's possible, but that's the feeding style. When you talk about a diver, it's somebody that's going after something more like mussels. Probably this guy's eating mussels here. And then we've got some ducks that are just flat out meat eaters. This is a red-breasted merganzer, also a sotus picture like the mute swan. And you can see the feeding style that this guy has. He's trolling. He is just fishing his heart out as he goes back and forth in this water with his face in there, looking for little fish to eat. That long, thin bill really cues you in on his diet. Think about that big, wide shoveler bill that I told you was for eating plants, and this narrow bill that this guy has so he can move it faster in the water to be able to catch fish. In addition, last thing I'll say about the Merg is they have a serrated bill. So you know what serrations are, even if you're not familiar with that word. Think of a steak knife with all the little pointy bits to it. So birds don't have teeth, but he has serrations. He's got tooth-like projections coming out of his bill there for grabbing onto those slippery fish and not letting them get away. So whether I migrate or not is important to the story, and what I eat is important to the story as well. a fish-eating duck or a flesh-eating duck, let's say, like the long-tailed duck, is going to be ingesting a different quantity of toxins, a different quality of toxins, a different type of toxins, maybe even than the birds that are just eating plants. So we're going to transition into that in just a moment here. I thought about HABs and ducks as well, and I'm happy to be contradicted later in the comment section if anybody knows more about this than I do. But from what I've read, certainly you can see here from the headline here, I tried to pull one that was a recent one, that the HABs can be a real problem for waterfowl, and is that second capture there shows you it doesn't need to be a lot. They don't need to ingest very much in order for it to be fatal. But I believe I have this correct. I'm thinking to myself, in a lake like Canandaigua, if you're relying on finding dead ducks washing up on shore to tell you whether you have a harmful algal bloom or not, you're probably waiting too long. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying they can't predict this. And from what I read, most of the people that were using waterfowl to look for things, harmful algal blooms and botulism, were doing so in saltwater communities where monitoring the ocean is just a little bit harder than it would be our nice Finger Lakes here, even our biggest of our Finger Lakes. So I would say that certainly you could use waterfowl. And of course, if this is killing ducks, it would kill geese and swans as well. Using them to tell you that you have HABs, I believe might be waiting too long, right? There's got to be better ways to find harmful algal blooms than this. Can we just take a look at these symptoms for just a second? Who's been fixating on those? Does this look like one of those commercials for some drug on TV, and then they give you all the possible side effects of it? These look terrible. This looks like a really bad way to die. I'm sensing I'm never going to be asked to speak to this group again. Let's talk about gulls. So notice that I've got the word gull written there and not seagull. First, let's never say the word seagull as one word. Can we agree to that? There's really not seagulls. There are gulls that live at the sea, and I guess you could call those seagulls. I grew up in Arundequite. We did have gulls at the bay, or bay gulls, as we like to call them, but we shouldn't call them that. That's not an official name. This, in fact, is a ring-billed gull, which is probably a really good name for this guy. And my question is, are the gulls in the Finger Lakes good bioindicators? Well, we would need to know a couple things. First, are they sensitive to pollution? And what I found was maybe in some cases. I mean, there's certainly some pollutants that everything has to be sensitive to. You just can't help it. But think about the diet of a typical Finger Lakes gull. Like, these things are eating garbage. They're eating French fries. They're eating all kinds of stuff. They're not particularly fussy. So first, that might indicate a high tolerance for pollutants and such, but it also means that they're going to be harder to tell us. If we found a problem in gulls, it would be harder for us to figure out where it came from, because their diet is so varied, and much of it doesn't come from the aquatic environment like it would have in more natural setting. So they're certainly picking dead carp on the shore, but they're also picking out dead French fries at the Burger King parking lot. And then I'd like to leave you with one other thought here that we're gonna hone in on in just a moment. The majority of our gulls are non-breeders. So most of the gulls that we have in the Finger Lakes are here and are residents, but they're not building nests, not having young. And that'll become important in their ability to tell us the health of the water in a couple different ways. Okay. So I mentioned to you guys that the diet is going to have a difference here, and I'll explain why if I can do it just quickly now and then in more detail later. When you're eating another animal, you're eating an animal that may have eaten a smaller animal, that may have eaten zooplankton, that may have eaten phytoplankton. So the farther up the food chain you are, the greater chances you have of getting more and more pollution into your body because of what you ate. So I'll give you the whole term for that in just a few minutes here. But let's just talk about all the piscivores just in general here. And I want to introduce you to that word. You should be able to tease it out, I would guess. You probably know carnivore from, I don't know, 5th grade, right? Did you learn carnivore in 5th grade? Who remembers 5th grade? Anybody? It was the toughest 3 years of my life, so I'll never forget 5th grade. Herbivores eat plants, piscivores eat piscas, eat fish. So we're talking about fish eaters. And I wanted to use this picture of the great blue heron because I just love this. Like you can see that beak wide open there. Look at that fleshy mouth that it has. You can just imagine this guy stabbing a fish and swallowing it down. And as I had this picture and I was putting together this PowerPoint, I realized that I have lots of pictures of piscivores with their mouths open. So 2 other birds that we're going to talk about, the double-crested cormorant on the left that looks completely shocked, but is actually just yawning, and the freedom eagle on the right that is screaming to the sky there over himself. When I say piscivore, I don't mean like in a legal definition, like you can only eat fish. The picture on the right is actually from a trail camera that was in a pond in my backyard. I'm actually giving a presentation on trail cameras next week, not for this organization, so maybe I shouldn't advertise it. But he grabbed a bullfrog and in front of the camera, and it took a picture of him. So I have seen great blue herons catching mice. They will eat a variety of things, but the vast majority of their food is fish. And I love that picture on the left. That's a nice sunset picture. And he caught that fish and then flopped it into the air until he caught it head first before he swallowed it. Because you think about all of the spines, all of the scales that can cause a problem on that long throat trip that he's got all the way down to his stomach there. So you've got to be able to swallow that food whole, and you've got to be able to swallow it in the correct direction. And this is how great blue herons fish. So not always so deep of a thrust here, but great blue herons stand waiting for the fish to come to them. And when they do, they plunge their face into the water there, and they're going to stab the fish or be able to grab a smaller fish like a set of chopsticks. I'm using my hands here like you can see me. Let's compare that to another piscivore, an osprey. This is an osprey fishing in what amounts to here is a puddle. So this was a great experience we had in late summer here in the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. As the water levels went down, as summer progressed, the water got smaller and smaller, and the osprey had no choice but to come and catch fish close to the road. And I was able to get some pictures here. Look at the talons on that guy. Not just how big the talons are, but look at the arrangement of those toes. Like that fish has got nowhere to go, right? No matter which direction that fish tries to go in, there's going to be a stabby point trying to tell him no thank you. Are you guys familiar with osprey? Same osprey, different day on the left here. Let's look at some statistics for the osprey, shall we? These are guys that dive for live fish. And I didn't think about this until I just read this on Cornell's page this past week. They're the only raptor in North America that does that, which is kind of cool. They're not the only bird that does it, but they're the only raptor that does it. They can travel as far as 10 miles from their nest to find food. And that's a good lesson to know, because I am seeing a large increase in osprey nests in our area since I've been here. I've been at the college for 26 years. My wife and I have lived in Seneca Falls now for 28 years. And there's just more and more osprey in that amount of time. Not that I'm taking credit for it, but perhaps I had something to do with it. I'm just kidding. I had nothing to do with it. But think about the fact that this bird is willing to fly 10 miles to find food. Why wouldn't it just build its nest closer to the water and then not have to travel so far, right? Like, you know what you're going to eat. You're going to eat fish. So what would be the purpose of having your nest 5-6 miles even away from the water? Well, the answer is because they need a certain kind of nesting structure, and that is a large open tree. They have such a huge wingspan, and they need to be able to see who's coming for them, and they also need to be visible themselves. I read an interesting article years ago that talked about both osprey and bald eagles sitting high up in trees purposely to make themselves visible so that no other osprey or eagle, I shouldn't say no one, thinks that this territory is unclaimed. Like, you sit up high so all your neighbors know you're still there, right? Anyway, it's kind of interesting. Why do I have tree in quotes? Well, because you may have seen osprey nests on top of utility poles. Those are great open nests. As long as you don't touch two wires, they're great open nesting places. So that's why an osprey will have its nest far from water, because that's the only tree that it could find. Now, these guys typically live a couple decades, which sounds good if you're a bird, sounds terrible if you're a human. And these birds migrate. I just took my wildlife management class to Montezuma on Tuesday, and we were looking at osprey nests, and we were actually seeing bald eagles, but we did not see any ospreys because the ospreys are all gone now. They're what are called obligate migrants. They're obliged to migrate. They have no choice. I just like that picture there. Okay. I told you that I've noticed an increase in osprey. Let's have a look at what the data is here. In 1980 to 1985, New York State underwent their very first breeding bird atlas. And if you've never seen this map before, let me just kind of cue you into it. I believe I have this statistic right. These boxes are 5 kilometer by 5 kilometer boxes, and the entire state was broken into thousands of these. And volunteers went out and they searched for breeding birds. And in that entire 5-year period, these were all of the nests that were found for osprey. Now, I think you can read this. You may have to lean in a little bit, but the blue, it means it was confirmed. Look at Long Island. Tons of osprey nests. Red is probable. Like, let's say you saw an osprey carrying a fish or nesting material. And then yellow, that light yellow color, is possible. I saw an osprey during the breeding season. Okay. So you can see that we've got Long Island leading the show, and then the Adirondacks, all those lakes up there in second place. Let's compare it to the 2000, 2005 data. Wow, look at the change. So I'm not sure, when I show you guys my screen, I don't know if you're seeing my cursor as well. Maybe a yes and maybe a no. There's this blue line here. If you're familiar with where the Finger Lakes would be, there's a straight blue line, which is Clwa Lake. That literally means every single block along Seneca Lake had a confirmed osprey nest in it. And then you don't see that pattern repeated for any of the Finger Lakes. You can see Oneida Lake in this map as well. That blue, the finger that goes in the wrong direction lake. it's not a Finger Lake, is it, Bruce? That goes east-west, and you can see that in this map. Well, I wonder if really the other lakes had that many fewer ospreys, or they just had that many fewer volunteers. One of the problems with using a data set is always that you have to be careful about how that data was collected and what biases it might have, what hidden pieces it might have. And at the other end of Clwa Lake, I live in the Seneca Falls end. I don't have lakefront property, but I live in Seneca Falls. And at the other end of Clwa Lake is Ithaca, which is home to a very famous college, Ithaca College. I have to say that because that's where my wife graduated from. Of course, I'm referring to Cornell University, and Cornell has an internationally acclaimed lab of ornithology. So it's no surprise to me that the Cornell bird nerds are driving up and down the lake, spotting all of these osprey nests. It could be that there were more osprey on that lake than any other, but it could also be more of a reflection of expert volunteers there. let's talk about the osprey's older cousin here, the bald eagle. Bald eagles have some things that are similar to osprey and some that are very different. In fact, I just want to give you a little tidbit here. The oldest known wild bald eagle was 38 years old. It was actually from here in New York State. It was banded in New York State, and it was recovered here in New York State. And that bird was 38. That's pretty old for any wild bird. These are birds that do more scavenging and stealing of food than they do getting their own. The process of stealing another animal's meal is called kleptoparasitism. You may know what a kleptomaniac is. That's someone that is obsessed with stealing things. Parasite is something that lives off of another thing. So kleptoparasitism, you put that together. I live off of ospreys by stealing their food. I'm a parasite on them because I bully them for their lunch money. Oh my gosh, we're back in 5th grade again. So I've seen this, and maybe some of you have seen this as well. An osprey catches a fish, a bald eagle comes zooming in on him and harass him until the osprey drops the fish and the eagle gets it. But because they're scavengers, they end up eating less fish than osprey do. Bald eagles will readily go to white-tailed deer carcasses, for example. That's an issue. It also would like to point out that it takes 5 years for bald eagles to mature. You may be looking at this bird and saying, dude, that's not a bald eagle. Where's the bald head? Well, this is an immature bald eagle. I can assure you it's a bald eagle. And when they're young, when they're immatures, they really do wander widely. Even as adults, they do. But boy, they just see the world, man. The eagles can travel a very long distance before they finally settle down. And they don't have to migrate. The ospreys have to migrate. The bald eagles don't. So guess what happens sometimes? Mr. and Mrs. Osprey head down to Brazil for our winter, and they come back and they're tanned and they know some Portuguese, and they come back to their nest and there's squatters in it. There's bald eagles. Not only are they there, but they've already laid their eggs there. Bald eagles not only steal food from ospreys, but they also steal nests from them because they have the opportunity here. There's a meme that says free real estate, and I didn't include that in here, but this would have been perfect for that, for all you younger kids out there. Okay, so a lot of these differences between the osprey and the bald eagle are important when we start looking at what they're going to be like in terms of a bioindicator. So I don't want to lose focus of that. But I do want to talk about the amazing story, the comeback of the bald eagle that everybody has heard of, I guess. I found this statistic that in 1963, I wasn't even born in 1963, just to be honest. I may have been conceived in 1963, but I wasn't quite born yet. There were only 417 bald eagle nests in the entire lower 48. Wow. No wonder they were put on the endangered species list. At its low point, New York State was down to 1 bald eagle nest. Now I'm showing you a map here from 1980, and you can see 2 blue dots. One is up towards the Adirondacks, Watertown area, and the other one is at the south end of Hemlock Lake. So obviously 1980 was not the low point for bald eagle nests in New York State, but it was pretty darn close. Look at what a difference 20 years made. That's pretty impressive. And I need to say one more thing about this. Can I say 2 more things? Is that okay? You're kind of a captive audience, or you've logged off. Those are your 2 choices. The first thing that I wanted to say was this data is gross enough, is these boxes are big enough that in many of these squares, there's more than 1 bald eagle nest. So the recovery is even greater than what we see here. At Montezuma alone, I can look at several of these boxes and note more than 1 bald eagle nest inside of those, just right here in our local community. And that was the second thing that I wanted to remember to add. So you saw, if we go backwards, you see the dates 80 to 85, 2000 to 2005. Guess what's happening in 2020 to 2025? Well, lots of things are happening, but the one thing that I want to talk about is the third breeding bird atlas. So we just we just concluded, excuse me, the very first year of the third atlas, and I am so excited to see how much more this bald eagle map is going to be filled in than it was 20 years ago. Speaking about excited, I took that eagle picture last week. So that is the newest picture that I have in this PowerPoint. There's a Boy Scout camp down near Ovid. I used to work with a gentleman who volunteers down there. He called me up, said they were seeing eagles, and I went and sat for a while and got this nice picture here. Ooh, there's that Alula we were talking about. Do we have any real bird nerds in the crowd? So we're looking at the left wing, that on the right side of the bird as we're facing it, that dark short feather that's there in its wing at the very end, that's an Alula feather, and that is connected to the bald eagle's thumb. And if you are paying attention, you remember we talked about that with the mute swan. Okay, so I've got an osprey sitting here in a nest. Full disclosure, this is a Florida picture, but it's the same species of osprey that we have here. Okay, so my question for you is, what do you know about ospreys and eagles and the whole DDT story? You probably know something. Like, I think everybody's heard this story, right? So DDT was a pesticide that was never actually how do I want to say this? It was never actually approved for usage in the United States, but it was created here. And it's one of those pesticides that's an organochloride. And if you have to take a class on chemistry, you can learn the ins and outs of organochlorides. But essentially, what they do is interfere with your ability to process calcium. So in a human, you might be thinking of something like osteoporosis, right? Weak bones. I had to go to the dentist today. He said I have very strong teeth. I had fluoride in my water when I was a kid. True story. But in birds, that also translates to eggshells. So for birds that are especially long-lived, like ospreys and bald eagles, they can live so long that they keep accumulating this toxin in their system to the point where they lay an egg and the eggshell is so thin that they literally crush it while they're just trying to roll it or sit on it, incubate it. This happens through a process called biomagnification. I promised you we would talk a little bit more about this, that the animal that's at the top of the food chain has more problems since concentrations of pollutions are higher in their food. Here, I wish this wasn't quite so blurry, but hey, when you're stealing stuff from other people's websites, you can't be picky. Look at the very bottom here, right? You got these single-celled organisms. You've got those phytoplankton that are going to be consumed by zooplankton, and then those boxes that almost look like dominoes, but pretty bad dominoes. They're showing you contaminants. So at the very bottom of the food chain, each organism may only have a couple in it. But by the time you get up to the bald eagle, who's eating a fish that has been eating all kinds of fish his whole life, who've been eating all kinds of zooplankton its whole life, they're going to end up getting more and more in their system, because each level that you go up the food chain accumulates more of the toxins. Add to that the fact that the bald eagle lives for decades. And I don't know, let's do the math here. If you were a 38-year-old bald eagle right now in the Finger Lakes, you were born in the early 1980s. You were born at either Watertown or Hemlock, because those were the only two nests in New York State at the time. And you've had all of those years to accumulate these toxins. Even though we have not dumped these toxins recently, they're still existing in the system. They're kind of forever chemicals. So let's just use osprey as our example. Are ospreys good bioindicators? And I mentioned memes earlier. This is a meme that the youngins would know about. Sure, they're good indicators, but some ways they're not good indicators. Like I don't want you to screenshot this and really think I'm saying ospreys are not good bioindicators, but they've got some problems. And some of the problems are this. If what they're showing, if the problem that they're showing is that their eggshell is too thin, okay, then it's not, you have to actually see what's happening in the nest, right? There's a bald eagle nest at the north end of Canandaigua Lake. Does that mean that the lake is healthy? I don't know. Where are those bald eagles getting their food, first of all, because it doesn't have to be in Canandaigua Lake? Where are those bald eagles spending the winter, because it doesn't have to be at Canandaigua Lake? And what is happening to their eggs? Just because two healthy adults showed up doesn't mean that they are healthy enough, that they are I should have said two living adults showed up, doesn't mean they're healthy enough to have viable offspring. So this first problem that we have is you really have to monitor an osprey and eagle nest if you're trying to use them to indicate whether there's pollution, specifically organochlorides. But you don't have to go in the nest and look. Do you know how you could monitor their success at a distance? It's pretty simple once I say it. Well, you just wait and see if the birds are bringing food to the nest. If you have an osprey nest and you can't see inside of it, but all day long the adults are bringing fish to it, guess what's inside of the nest? And second, I've mentioned this before, even though bald eagles range widely when they're younger and sort of settle down as they get older, ospreys every single year have to go. And some of them literally do go to South America. So if they show toxins, if their eggshells are thin, is it because Canandaigua Lake water has DDT in it, or the water in Brazil has it, or somewhere in between? And then finally, you should never try to use any one of these birds to predict the health of the lake as a whole. So even if I do have healthy, viable eggs being produced at a bald eagle nest in Canandaigua, it doesn't tell you anything about other types of pollutants that we may have. I just wanted to finish up with this last story. How am I doing for time? This is an overhead shot of a cormorant flew right over me, and I got a picture of him here. And this sort of shows you some of the conflicts that you can have in this story. This particular study was done from 1986 to 1991, like in the old days, ancient times. And what they were finding is lots of deformities in the chicks, and specifically in the cormorants. I'll be honest with you, I didn't read the Caspian tern part because I wasn't as interested. So there was a high number, as high as 5% of the eggs, the chicks were showing deformities. Some of them grotesque, bill misshaped, and the babies were dying. They just couldn't survive. This was happening at the same time that the cormorant population was really expanding, because by this time we had stopped we had cleaned up the waters. Pollution levels had lowered enough that the population was rebounding. So at the very time that they were seeing these problems with the young was also at the time that they were saying, yeah, but there's more eggs that are being laid in general. So the cormorant population was going up, even though the babies, the bioindicators, were sounding the alarm. Hey, our parents are still full of pollutants. Does that make sense? So it can be really a complicated story, but the answer to whoever asked the question, can large birds be bioindicators? Yes and no, and cautiously yes, perhaps is how I want to say that. Gosh, I feel like that's such a deflated ending there. So maybe instead of us just stopping at that point, I'll see if there's any questions and we can chime in that way. Hey, there's still people here.
Just because we weren't chatting back to you doesn't mean we weren't totally fascinated by your presentation. So,
okay,
so
good.
Thank you for sharing all that great information. Now we're going to open up the chat feature now. While you guys think about your questions, you're getting great feedback. Everybody's saying they loved your presentation so much. Thanks a million for the gift of your time and knowledge. Stay well and safe. We did have somebody email a question in early, so I'll get it rolling with a question received before your presentation.
Okay.
Are fish-eating birds suffering from some degree of lead poisoning due to lead shot and lead sinkers in our Finger Lakes?
Great. So I can only talk to that in general terms and just say absolutely. Lead shot is still an issue, and you may know that waterfowl hunting over water specifically requires you to use non-toxic shot. So most people translate that to just say steel shot, although the law allows there's a bismuth copper combination, but most hunters will end up using steel shot because that's cheaper. I consistently see people advocating for, and if I'm not mistaken, Ward Stone, who was the DEC pathologist for many, many years, always advocated for a total ban on lead shot, regardless of what wildlife was being taken. So if we use that white-tailed deer as an example, that's being scavenged by bald eagle, he could end up having lead ingested, even though the duck that he ate the day before, he had just ate a couple steel pellets that were in that. So I know it's still an issue, and part of that is because there's lead shot, let's say in water, in marshy areas, and then they do a reclamation project, and sometimes that stuff gets brought up from as I mentioned, ancient times, a couple decades ago. Everything seems like so far in the past these days, but anyway, that's the best I can tell you. I'm so sorry. I don't
That's
have
great. No, that's good. Okay, another question. Considering the load of nitrogen-rich waste left behind by migrating waterfowl, what level of harm do they cause to water quality?
I have only heard about them being a real problem in specific, so like in specific cases or in small bodies of water. And I know I would be concerned. How do I say this? Uh, the most legitimate concern seems to me goose poop on sidewalks, let's just say as an example, or at a park where you're out and you're walking your dog and your 3-year-old sort of thing. So rather than water quality in the Finger Lakes, although that picture of those snow geese, there's got to be a lot of nitrogen left behind just from those guys. I've still never seen anybody that's conclusively showed me that they're harming the water quality. It's when the scat is at the surface and people are interacting with it, or your pets are interacting with it in a highly concentrated way. But I wouldn't minimize the idea that it can't be an issue, especially in those conditions.
Great. Okay, a couple more questions just came through. What happens to a fish-eating bird if it eats a fish that has a hook in its system?
Great question. I I used to live in Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii for 3 years and taught high school there, and we talked about these kind of issues. One of the practices that a lot of fishermen would have is if they caught a fish that was undesirable or kind of dangerous. Eels were one example. They would just cut the line instead of trying to get the hook out. And the theory was it's salt water. The hook will eventually rust, which is certainly a possibility. But if a bird were to eat a fish hook in a fish, you could say the same argument with their stomach acid. Do you ever notice how I answer a question by telling a story first, but then eventually get back to the question that you
Get
asked?
back to it.
So the stomach acid, you could argue, would work on that, but would it work on it fast enough would be the question. And I will tell you that fish hooks certainly would seem to be a problem. And beyond that, though, think about how small that fish hook is and how long that fishing line could be. It's the monofilament that fishermen leave behind. Even if they were careful enough to cut the hook, just leaving yards and yards of that monofilament behind really is a problem to birds as well in terms of entanglement.
Great.
I'm seeing a couple of questions coming up on the chat. Can I grab a couple of those?
Sure. Yeah.
So somebody asked the question about cormorants proliferating in the Finger Lakes. I read an article in preparation for this PowerPoint that postulated that the cormorant numbers have returned to baseline, that they're back to what their normal is, that we grew up, I don't know how old this person is, but me at 56 grew up in a time when cormorant numbers were so low because of the pollution, that now it looks like their population has exploded, but in reality, maybe it's just returned to historical populations. And so with that in mind, if that's true, then you could argue that they would not destroy the native fish. However, we all know that the native fish are also pressed by other things, by two-legged fishermen. Well, aren't cormorants two-legged fishermen? I guess that's true. By humans and by other non-native invasives. So the cormorants can have an impact, but before we look to eliminating them, we should look at what other stresses we're putting on those fish as well.
Great.
I also Brian Hickman asked about the eagles on Canandaigua Lake. Brian, I only know of the one that you can see from the pier. So that's the only one that I know of on the north end. You're talking about one on the south end. So that's a different one than I know about.
Okay, how about two more questions in the interest of time? And then we are recording the questions we're getting in the chat feature here. So perhaps we can follow up when we send out the PowerPoint presentation and the video. Mute swans are considered by many to be an invasive species. What do you see happening with the population of mute swans in the coming years with respect to population management?
Thanks for that question, Pete. So the DEC kind of wrestles with that a little bit back and forth, and I will give you my standard answer on if mute swans are invasive, why aren't hunters allowed to shoot them? And the generic answer for that is the best answer that I would give is I think there's a genuine concern that if you allowed hunters to shoot mute swans, which would benefit our native wildlife, that tundra swans would also accidentally be shot as well. I deal with misidentification literally on a daily basis. So I can't imagine that there would be hunters with 100% compliance out there and not be shooting the wrong kinds of swans. In addition, shooting swans or otherwise eliminating swans is one of those things that rises to the level of more of a social issue. So if it was an ugly bird or one that had a terrible name, then we probably would be a much easier invasive management plan for them. But I'm thinking that they're going to be more aggressive in oiling eggs and quietly removing adults.
Great. Okay, last question. Seems that there are a lot of breeding gulls on Squaw Island, just renamed Peace Island today. Oh, wonderful. Is that true?
I have heard that. I've never made that little canoe trek out to there, but I have heard that they do nest on that island. But I've also heard that the nests are not very successful due to wave action swamping the island. So I have anecdotally always just thought of it as attempted nests, not successful ones.
Well, John, we have to thank you for your time. That was a really awesome talk. You shared some really great photos as well. So maybe down the line, you can help us all with our wildlife photography skills and offer us another workshop. Those are really, really wonderful images. I just wanted to, you mentioned something earlier I wanted to bring back up. If you guys enjoyed John's presentation, since he's a director of the FLCC and Mueller Field Station, they have a nature talk series. And John mentioned earlier that Wednesday, November 18th, he's going to have a talk coming up. It's on trail cameras in the classroom, research and education in the Finger Lakes. So there's another way to learn from John coming up later this month. And you also mentioned a couple of things that I found very interesting, and I know I'm going to start following if you're interested in birds and waterfowl. You had mentioned the Audubon Society and Montezuma and also Mueller Field Station are all good to follow on social media as well, because there's great information and photos that are put out by those groups. So make sure you're following and connecting with all the different groups in the Finger Lakes to learn more about birds in our region. So thanks so much, John. We really appreciate your time, and thank you all for tuning in tonight.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody.